Welcome to the Father Figure Formula. Create moments that matter.
Okay, welcome to the Father Figure Formula Fireside Chat. Today we have a very special guest, and you're starting off with a smile, which I think is a
Yeah.
great way to intro here. Let's take a second here to have Elliot here, the otherwise known as the husband dad, give himself a little introduction before we get into some hard-hitting questions.
I love it. Well, number one, thank you for having me. Excited to be on Triple F. We're gonna, we're surpassing Triple D, diners, drive-ins, and dives. So we're
Yes.
right to the top there. So hopefully no copyright strike. But
Right.
no, I'm super happy to be here. My name's Elliott Nathan. I'm originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Grew up in the city. For anyone listening, not the suburbs, an actual city kid, and moved out to the University of Oregon, where I lived in Eugene for 4 years and had a great time out there. Moved around a little bit after college, New York City, Brooklyn, Montana, and then found my way to beautiful Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Moved here about 10 years ago, 2014, for a job, but ended up meeting a wonderful woman and kind of got handcuffed to Sioux Falls and South Dakota. But every year that I've been here, I've learned to love it more. It's a wonderful community, great place to raise a family. And I couldn't be more happy to be in Sioux Falls. So full time, I work in social media management. But on the side, I like to do some content creation, whether it's the husband dad, or the Sioux Falls Stroll Club, Common Dad. There's a number of different dad elements that I stay involved in and stay busy with. So happy to be here, and excited to share some of my journey and my story with the audience.
Amazing. Thanks for the intro. And I feel like I'm a big energy guy. Like I like
Yeah,
to. And I haven't met you in person or anything, but I'm already vibing with your energy coming
I
through the
love it,
the,
man. I love it.
the,
And you
the
can tell
video.
right away. You can tell,
Yeah,
like, if you intro someone and they're here, you're like, oh, this is gonna be a long hour, but like, you gotta, if you're up and ready to go. And I mean, that's true about everything, right? I mean, not to jump
Mm.
right in, but parenting, like, if your spouse is, kind of giving you one of these, and you're like, where's the weekend gonna go, or so energy vibes very important, and I think it can make an impact on the direction of a day or of an individual call. So I'm with it.
Yeah, and even the smiles and the laughter, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But let's kind of get into maybe some potential like identity or origin story for you. Like, so before people knew you as a husband dad, like who were you actually trying to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think before I was the husband dad, and still to this day, I mean, I'm a small blip in the giant galaxy, right? Like I'm not better, I'm not better, worse, more significant, or more impactful, than anyone else. I think, who we are is based on how we treat others and the love and the values that we have. So I would say at my core, I'm an empath, someone who loves others, who wants to help others, who would rather see somebody else smile and someone else succeed, than myself. So I think our identity, and certainly for myself, it comes from, it's cliche, but it is like, like leave it cleaner than when you found it. Like what can I do to make the world a little better of a place? Make my job a little better, my family, whatever it is. So I think, before the husband dad, during the husband dad, and any time that the husband dad's done, who I am will hopefully always be, a good person, someone that has good values and morals, and someone that can make people laugh, that can, bring a smile to someone's face, a good friend, a good son, a good husband, and those types of pieces. So that's a, it sounds like a cliche answer, but really I hope that if I have one thing in life, that it's having those values and being remembered for that. And I would say in a more specific, in a more tangible answer, I am and will always be a creator. I come from two parents that were both artists. And I believe in the ability to create, and whether that's an individual drawing, a novel, a piece of content. Everyone has a different gift, a different skill, and doing what you can to create and build, I think is something so important, and that, we have to utilize our skill set to give that gift and to build and create. So I think when I think about who I am, I would say, an empath and a creator.
And I think you touched on a couple of interesting topics there. Like a lot of times I talk with people like, some people are trying to make these massive gains, but I think that the improvements or even talked about skills kind of happens over time, right? And I
Yeah.
think like learning a new skill, being patient with it, being humble, and I think even like starting with some self-assessment. So I guess like leading into the next question, what did kind of becoming a father really expose about you that maybe you didn't even know was there?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. The number one thing that becoming a father exposed for me was that I'm not as smart or as good as I thought I once was. And I would say to that point, like, I don't know everything, and I need to admit that I don't know everything so that I can be willing to learn. I think, especially with men, we think we have it all figured out. Like, this is the way to do it. This is how you do it. This is the solution. This is the answer. And we spend so much time trying to fix it or solve it. But being a father taught me is that it's okay to not know. It's okay to ask questions, to be inquisitive, to, show support to your spouse or to your kids and not have the answer. So I think really, like, becoming a dad taught me that, for me to be the best partner and the best dad, I have to be willing to say, you know what, I was wrong there, or I did mess that up, or I'm not sure how to do that. What do you think, honey? How do you want to solve this together? And when you have both partners over here digging their heels in, and no one's willing to admit that they're wrong, and willing to compromise, willing to change, that's when arguments happen. That's when discussion starts. That's when, things become difficult. But if and not to go into politics on the podcast here, but I think if especially in America, if we could all do a better job of maybe just listening to the other side, listening to someone else, showing some love and empathy, we might get a lot farther in life than trying to constantly, prove why we're right. Let me tell you why I'm right, honey, or why, your side is wrong. There's too much of that. So I think being a dad taught me that it's okay to not be right. It's okay to admit that you messed up. And it's okay to want to learn and to want to try, and to challenge yourself to be better. Part of growth comes with those steps of improvement, day by day, minute by minute.
And I know that for me, that was personally like a progression because I'm on the
Yeah.
same line as you, right? It's not something that happens overnight. It does take
It,
time.
it, it,
So maybe when that realization hits you, did you try to like power through it that probably most gents do, or did you fix it fast, or was it something you were like trying to quietly avoid?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, so for us, our timeline is we have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I would say, obviously our 5-year-old was born first 5 years ago. And I think for the first year, probably even 2 years, I didn't really understand that, like to put it into a practical example for the audience, we have two boys. They love to climb on stuff. Our 2-year-old would always be climbing on stuff. And dads, we're encouraging it. Yeah, go for it, buddy. Jump off that. Oh, let me build the
Higher.
tower for you. And moms, whoa, watch out, honey. Why is he doing that? Careful. Are you watching him? Are you, he's gonna get hurt. And we couples always get in these fights, and they say, honey, why are you, I got it. Like, I'm watching him, it's fine. And the wife says, you're never watching him. He's gonna get hurt. And it's this back and forth. And again, like, nobody's budging, nobody's willing to, understand the other person. And so, shout out to my wife and I's wonderful marriage counselor. She helped me understand, and this is about, a year, 2 years into having a kid, that, I need to be willing to change. I need to be willing to meet my wife in the middle, and she needs to be willing to meet me in the middle. So, in a practical sense, what that means is if he's going to climb on something, I need to know my wife's going to be uncomfortable with this. I need to be right under him in case he falls. Or I need to, let her know, hey, he's climbing on this, but I'm watching him. I'm right here, honey. You don't have to worry. And on her end, she has to have trust that I am watching him, and she doesn't have to make a comment every time that he's going to climb on something. So to your point, it took us a year, probably 2 years to understand that, that change comes from us both willing to try to meet in the middle. And risk tolerance was a really big one with us, where we're more risky. We're gonna do the thing, we're gonna take the shot, and women are, inherently, less of a risk taker. So, finding that balance between the two, not saying, you're always doing this, or, you never let us just have fun, and on her side, not nagging, but both being willing to try and figure out a solution together. So it is hard. It does take time. And I've been a dad for 5.5 years now, and I don't have it figured out. Like it's still, the next thing will come up, tonight, tomorrow, and I'll still have to slow down, remind myself, try to use these tricks and tools that I'm speaking about, to slow down in the moment and to try to communicate with my spouse, and while still having fun, or while still doing the activity with my kids. So it took me a long time, and it's still a work in progress to figure it out.
Always a work in progress, right?
Definitely,
And I know
definitely.
you were kind of talking about the marriage element. So let's vibe on that for a second. So, like, what's maybe the most common ways that dads kind of like accidentally damage their marriage after kids? Because I know you're kind of talking about communication, but
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I think there's a number of ways. I mean, I think let's be real about parenting, that it's hard and it's isolating, and you are in the trenches, and it's not like oh, it's gonna get better tomorrow, or it's gonna get easier. It never really does. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's amazing and it's awesome, and there's so many wins, but when you graduate from from the first 3 months where you're up all night, then now you have a kid, maybe at 6 or 9 months that's starting to crawl, and that's a new set of challenges. And then a year, and then, I mean, I don't have teenagers yet, but certainly it doesn't get any easier when the kids go, into their teens, and you're dealing with real life stuff. So I think, number one thing is establishing that parenting is hard. It's okay to not have it figured out, and it's okay to understand that we're all in the trenches. I think, to answer the question specifically, I think, where marriages and issues, start to come up is, when it's definitely within the communication, but I think it's when, a parent loses a sense of self and a sense of identity. For in our case, all my friends are in Minneapolis, so I don't have a lot of dad friends. I'm not going out to the bar drinking and, telling stories about my family to people. And my wife has a few friends, but I think for moms, it's really hard to leave in the first couple years. They don't want to be out doing stuff. So I think we start to lose our sense of self, our sense of identity, those things that we were able to do. Oh, I want to, go play pickleball. Well, before you had kids, you could just grab your racket and go play. You want to go ski, you can just go do that. And now, everything requires communication, requires responsibility, requires, scheduling, and it can be exhausting. So when we start to lose that sense of self, I think the next stage is probably some level of resentment, that you're stuck at home. You never get to go do fun stuff, or you don't get to go see your friends, or I never get to go out and do the things that I once did. So I think it's a 180 change from before we had kids, where we were free and financially free, freedom of responsibility. And now it's such a quick contrast to having a ton of responsibility, to having a ton of stuff on the schedule, and trying to be able to balance that. So I think we start to lose a sense of oneself. Sometimes we take it out on our partner, and that can lead to challenges in itself. but I definitely think probably the number one issue is communication. And it's not the child, it's not the kid itself, it's the parents communicating. So, it's not the kid's fault that he's 3 months old and he's up in the middle of the night screaming. It's mom saying, we need to go get him, and dad saying, no, it's fine, let him sleep. He's fine. He'll go back to sleep. And then it's this back and forth, right? So it's not the kid that is the challenge. It's the parents communicating, and again, the inability to see someone else's side, to maybe be willing to budge, and compromise on something. So I think there's a lot of factors, but so far for us, those have probably been some of the biggest challenges. And I will say, be willing to get help. Marriage counseling has been really big for us. And having a third party, it's not about them saying you're right, he's wrong, but it's about them offering another perspective. So
Mhm.
being willing to have those discussions, whether it's with a therapist or with friends or a podcast, whatever it may be, let's be open and honest about that, because certainly keeping a challenge, an issue that you have, keeping it inside of you is never going to get it solved. So being open, I think, is another one, that can lead to challenges and lead to struggles if it's not addressed.
Yeah, and that's being open, kind of form of communication, right? I think there's
Yeah.
definitely communication is the backbone of any relationship, right? So I guess if, and I've asked this to some other gents before too, like if your wife was sitting here right now and I had to finish this sentence honestly, Elliot is amazing, but I wish he would. What do you think she would say?
Shut up sometimes. Like Elliot is amazing, but I wish he didn't annoy me all the time. I mean, I think it's like, probably one of those things that, and we've talked about this. We've talked about this, that, it's I have, a bigger personality than her. So I think, we go into a group setting and I instantly take over the space, and I don't mean to do that, but I start talking and telling stories and sharing, and she feels minimized. She feels not significant. So I think what she would say is, I love Elliot, but sometimes I just wish he would be quiet. And she's said that to me straight up.
Mine would probably be listen more, which I think is a common
Yeah,
answer
yes,
for
yeah,
this question. So
yeah.
let's leave it at that. I think we're on the same page. I think it goes back to that energy thing too, that we're probably on the same path there. So what's maybe harder for you, like apologizing quickly or actually maybe changing the pattern of habit, which is obviously a negative pattern, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good question. You're gonna where speak of my wife. I have to walk downstairs and unlock the door. Her keys are not working and she's been texting me. So we can keep rolling on this podcast. I'm gonna mute the
You're
video
good.
for 1 second.
You're
As I
good.
as I as I walk downstairs really quick. Sorry, I thought it was I thought
Well,
I thought everything was
Elliot to the rescue here. No, I didn't know you
open.
were a hero as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah, yeah, I had to you'll have to edit that part out, or you can keep it in. Okay, we're back on set. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's been a progression for me. I think at first it was, you know, I think at first it was really hard to apologize at first, because I was so stuck in my ways early on. But I think over time, over the last 5 years, I've learned that, it's not a weakness to be wrong. And for me, often, I think just apologizing is something that, like, I'm willing to do for the greater good of the house. And 95% of the arguments, or discussions that we get in are really not substantial. Like, if if you and your spouse are arguing about, $100,000 purchase, or a new car, or something real, or where your kids are going to go to school, like, and you feel really strong, excuse me, strongly about something, that's something to hold the line on and don't back down. But, for us, most of the arguments stem from, you know, why didn't you take the trash out? Or, he needs a jacket. It's 40 degrees out and he's fine. He doesn't need a jacket. And, so, just saying like, hey, I'm sorry I said that, or, I'm sorry I got heated in the moment, or, being willing to admit like, hey, I'm stressed out about work. So I got upset at you about this other random thing that really doesn't matter. Point being that like, if you look at it in your relationship, probably 80-90% of the arguments are not that important. So if you can just take accountability, apologize, and move forward, it's going to be a lot better for the kids. It's going to be a lot better for you and your spouse. So I think my answer would be, over at first, I struggled to apologize, but I think in the last couple of years, I've recognized that, that's something that it's okay to do, it's healthy to do, and it's part of the growth in our process as adults, as men, being willing to admit when we're wrong and take accountability, and then hopefully move forward.
Yeah, and even I think the saying "I'm sorry" element is very powerful. I think even having your kids see you saying sorry is really powerful too. Because after actually having seen my kids say "I'm sorry" in maybe butting heads or certain situations, I think just having that they're listening first of all is really powerful. But that the word saying sorry goes a long way.
Yeah, 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 it does. And I think, yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point that, depending on the age of your kids, they're very impressionable, right? And they're watching our actions and they're watching what we're doing. And, it's something that we're instilling in them in the values and the morals piece of it and taking accountability. We want them to do that at school. We want them to do that at home. So hopefully they can see mom and dad do that as well. And they can learn from those experiences. So I love that.
Mhm. Yeah, and you kind of touched on stress there for a second. So let's talk about that. So like when stress really hits, what kind of version of Elliot like shows up at home?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when, well, yeah, again, it's a process and it's about growth. So, the version of Elliot that shows up now is far different than what it was 3 or 4 years ago. So, for me, stress, my origin story comes from my father. And most individuals listening or not listening, your reaction to stress, anxiety, it's going to be from your family of origin, right? And, did your parents talk about it? How did your parents react? What values and behavior did they instill in you? And, for my dad, there was in my family was we were very loud with our feelings. Everyone said how they felt. It would be more of like a traditional East Coast family, but like a loud Jewish family. Like, you have something on your mind, you say it. And it's no love lost. Like, it's like you say how you feel and we move on. So there was definitely, when I get stressed, I want to talk through it. I want to share how I feel. I think, some of my reactions in terms of, what my dad did was he had emotional reactions. So when he got stressed about something, or there was something that went on, his emotions would spike up really high. So, you're driving on the street and, your wife says, "Oh, watch out for that car." And, my dad, "What?" And slams on the brakes. And, it's this very heightened emotional situation. And, then she reacts to him. And so, early on in my relationship and, as a young father, I recognized, again, with the help of counseling, that I was having these emotional reactions to things. So, when I got stressed, if I was cooking dinner, I'm the cook in the house. If I got stressed, I would just make a comment, like, "Oh, this is the worst dinner ever. No one's gonna even like it." Or, it's like, just throw it all away. Nobody cares about, instead of like slowing down and communicating how I feel, or, sharing respectfully, my reactions to stress were very heightened in the emotions. And so, I needed to learn the term self-regulation and to calm down. And again, like, it's not something that you can just change overnight or over a week or over a month. Like, our brains are programmed the way they are and they're wired the way they are over 30, 40 years. So, for me to try to rewire it and to have a stressful experience and not get emotionally heightened, it's going to take years for me to learn those new actions and those new behaviors. So, something that I'm actively working on and that I try to react to or try to react now with stress is to self-regulate and to, take a moment and to walk away, or to respond in a calm way. I think another big thing that people don't do that I would say is highly recommended is, it's okay to be inquisitive when you get stressed out. And instead of trying to get upset or solve it, or, well, I'm just going to figure it out for myself then, ask why, why are you feeling this way, honey? Or, what's a solution that you can think of? Or how would you like me to handle this? Or what do you think about this idea? So, being willing to slow down to stress and be inquisitive can help de-escalate and solve the situation much faster than if you have a heightened response and I'll just do it myself or whatever it is. Like, that's never gonna fix anything. It's just gonna stress your partner out. It's gonna stress your kids out. And so, I think my original reaction to stress as a young parent is hopefully far different than my reaction to stress now as a parent. And I think once you have that second kid too, it's like you've kind of seen, you haven't seen it all, but you've seen a lot and you kind of know what you're getting into, what's going to happen. And so hopefully your reactions to those stressful situations are a little more prepared, a little more calm, a little more, in line with a dad or a parent who's kind of been there before. And you're a little more ready for the situation.
And you kind of talk about self-regulation. I think part of that is understanding like your own personal triggers and being able to see that maybe something's coming, and pick
Yeah.
up on those patterns and maybe have some positive patterns that you can replace for that, which is important. So, what's maybe a fear that you carry as a dad that you rarely say out loud?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I think yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, there's the cliche answer of, something happened to my kids, which you don't actively talk about, right? I'm not sharing my fears with my coworkers about, what could happen to my kids at school. So, I think, I think something that is probably deeper beneath the surface. I think for me, probably my greatest fear as a dad is not having a close relationship with my kids. And, it's something that I've, don't talk to them about yet because they're just 5 and 2. I talked to my wife about it a little bit, but, I don't share it a lot because it's very personal and it's not very tangible right now. But I had a great dad who was very involved in my life. He's a wonderful man, but him and I were not best friends. He was not someone that I could call and say, hey, I'm going through this or I'm going through that. I mean, I could, but I didn't ever have that relationship with him. We didn't connect on sports and things that I loved. And so, my greatest goal in life is as a dad is to, have two boys that are my best friends and have two boys that want to play pickup basketball, till it's dark out every single night and want to go snowboarding with me every single weekend. And my greatest fear would be to not have that, to have, my kid want to go play basketball with his friend or with his neighbor instead of playing with dad. And I think, naturally that will happen, right? Of course, they become teenagers, they want to play with their friends, but like, I want him to know my greatest fear would for him to feel like dad's not there to get some, practice in or to, go play at the park. or to go do an activity. And if he's not into sports, he is into sports already. But if he's not into sports down the road, then it's music, then it's art, then it's whatever his passion is. That, my greatest fear would be for my boys to feel like they can't connect with dad, on a deeper level, beyond the surface.
Good answer. And I think like a part of what you're kind of enforcing there, again, it's a little bit early to kind of talk about this, but I often question my own kind of relationship with my kids too. And a lot of it I think really comes down to like being present, like actually in that time and space aligned with them at that given time. So what does maybe
Yeah.
being present to actually look like to you?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, I think like, nowadays it's hard because, we're all here. We're all, on our devices, we're on our laptops, we're on our computers, we're working from home, we're, answering emails, we're getting looking for instant gratification on social media. And so, I think it's not it, you know, it starts number one with, trying to limit the screens and limit the devices when we are home. So, obviously it's not a hot take to say, a present parent is one that's not staring at their cell phone when their kids are home, who's not giving them a tablet right when they get home, or putting on a movie right when they get home from school or whatever the activity is. Now, with that being said, I just a small caveat that we are not anti-screens in this house. Screens have a wonderful purpose in life, and they do serve a great purpose, for kids in moderation. But I think being a present dad, it means showing up, it means listening. And, for me personally, it means, being willing to roll around on the ground, to be willing to do imaginary play, to be willing to try a new sport, to be willing to have a new adventure with your kids. I think we can all put ourselves in those, positions as a kid, and, wish our parents did something, whatever it may be. For me, it was, I didn't, it's the sports example, but I didn't have anyone to throw the baseball with. And so for me, being present means, when my son wants to throw the baseball, like, we're going to throw the ball for as long as I can, as long as dad can. So, being present means, showing up and doing an activity. It means actively listening and trying to understand. And I would say even beyond like listening, like, like it's about like, as the cool kids say, it's about like gassing them up too. Like, your kid tells you a story, it's not like, oh, cool. That's a great story. It's like, wow, tell me more. Like, what happened next? It's about like, getting them excited and like, can you believe that? Like, what would you do in that situation? Or like, it's about like taking that next step, right? Like, it's very easy for parents to say like, oh, cool, like, happy you did that or whatever. But I think a present parent is one that, that follows up, that asks more, that doesn't just like buy them the toy and build it for them, like plays with it with them, and like, expands on that. So I think being present means going above the bare minimum, and, knowing that your kids are gonna see that and are gonna be appreciative of that ultimately.
I like that answer. So, you work in social media and you're a creator. So like, how do you keep your entire life from becoming content?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'll straight up say it, but I don't. I'm chronically online, and I mean, I'm a full-time social media manager, so I'm creating content, building strategy. I work for a software company here in Sioux Falls, so I'm building paid organic strategy for them. I'm the butcher, baker, and candlestick maker. So anything that comes to social, I'm creating, for the company. And then when I'm not working, outside of 8 to 5. I'm creating content for the husband dad. And, I'm a creative, so the idea machine does not turn off. It's 6 a.m. on the treadmill, the bicycle. I'm thinking of ideas. I'm writing them down. It's 8 p.m. and I got an idea. I'm writing it to myself. So and then I also have the Sioux Falls Stroll Club, which is a club and organization for dads where we meet up once a month. We do a walk around our community, and I've been doing that for about 6 months. I'm the founder and sole proprietor of that one. So I'm also thinking about our next meetup, our next event, building content for the Stroll Club. So simply put, I'm not. I'm always connected in some way, unless I'm with the kids when I try to, turn it off. Um, you know, and I'm duly conflicted about that if I'm being honest. On one side, I see the dangers of social media, the misinformation, the challenges that we present when we give everyone in society a voice. But I also see the beauty and the opportunity to build. 50 years ago, 20 years ago, something like the Sioux Falls Stroll Club wouldn't be possible. I wouldn't be able to connect with dads in my community. We've seen examples of this across the world where, communities are built through Meta, through Facebook groups, through Instagram groups, whatever it may be, let alone all the small businesses that have had, billions of dollars in success from videos or content creation, all for free from these apps where, 20, 30 years ago, you would have had to take out a newspaper ad. Hey, dad meetup, Saturday or something, show up, or, a radio ad, and that would have cost you money and all those things. So it's like, it can be a lot, and there is a, dangerous side of it, but if used correctly, social media and that marketing space, can really be a beautiful tool, to build your story and connect with communities, locally and around the world.
It's a powerful tool used in the right way, in the right hand, for sure.
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
what part of being a content creator like genuinely makes you a better dad?
Yeah, I mean, I think the part of I think for me that would definitely be the stroll club, because I'm meeting with other dads, I'm learning about their experiences, I'm building community, and so, I think like when dads get a chance, and parents in general, like when we get a chance to, maybe leave the house for a little bit and go out. You're going to come home and you're going to be a better partner and you're going to be a better dad. And like, I think sometimes parents have this idea of like, well, I can't leave him with like both kids. Like, but actually, if like you go out on that girls' night, or go on that guys, event or guys' weekend, like you're going to come back and be a better dad, a better mom, a better partner, because you're jazzed up, you're excited to be back, you're fueled with excitement. So I think sometimes like separating ourselves for a little bit, although in the moment it might feel like, a loss, or it might feel like you're, putting more weight on the other person, it actually, in my experience, has a net positive impact because, we come back more energized and more ready to jump in and be involved and more willing to maybe, pick up or do the extra work that it takes, to have a family, or to be a person. So, I think, the Stroll Club makes me a better dad because I'm building a community of other dads that I can learn from. On the husband dad side, I think, I don't know if it necessarily makes me a better dad, but I think it does serve as a creative outlet where, I can share these relatable situations with the community, and other people, can say, wow, I thought I was the only one, or, wow, I'm going through that exact same thing, or send me a message and say, man, that was a great video. Like, you're spot on. So, it's validation, it's understanding, and it's, we all need a release in life. And for some people that can be, making a video, it could be, reading a book, whatever it is, right? Like, that release, allows you to be a better person, because you have time to yourself, and, you're able to come back even more energized.
Mhm. So speaking, I guess, the community, like, so like, why do you think so many men struggle to build like real friendships after becoming dads?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I think it's hard. I mean, I think like, there's probably a deep rooted answer here that I couldn't, I haven't studied psychology, to the, university level. So, but I think going back for decades and decades, men never shared their feelings. It was not very man-like to be emotional or to share those feelings. It was manly to go work and to gather and to provide. And so, I think number one there, you weren't able, if a dad 20 or 30 years ago said like, well, gosh, I don't really have any friends. I would love to go meet someone, like you would be looked at as soft or weird or, like what do you mean? Like, go get a job or something like that. And, I think there's the number one piece of it that, we're kind of trained for a long time to not share our feelings. I think, to that point too, like men were usually the ones that were working and, providing for their family. So maybe they didn't have as much time. But I think like, there was a period in, for a while, beyond the 50s and 60s or 70s, there was a period where like the dad thing to do was to like go drink beer in the garage. Like that was what you did. If you're a dad and you wanted friends, like go sit in your garage and drink beer and, talk, smack about, the women in your life or whatever. And it's like now dads don't do that. Now dads are active, involved, we're present, we're there. So I think like, now it's becoming more acceptable, for dads to like, want to create a dad club because we're active, we're involved in our kids' life. So it's like, hey, let's, grab the stroller, like let's go to the park together. Now it's looked at as more commonplace because those kind of, I call it like the Homer Simpson dad, right? That's like, oh, I have no idea how to pack the diaper bag and I'm so clueless and I just, work at a factory. And it's like, that was, 20, 30 years ago, like, maybe 10 years ago, but still, it's not today. Dads are not like that anymore. So I think it's about, to answer it specifically, it's like, it takes time, it takes years for us to go through these different stages, of time. And for a long time it was dads are working and dads are, not going to be soft. And then it was, kind of the dad doesn't know what he's doing. And now that's all changed. So I think it's now more acceptable for dads to be present and to be out there building community and making friends.
Mm. So maybe what's something that you've seen that's happened inside the stroll club that maybe like genuinely like surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing that surprised me is, and this one is, I've had a couple cliche answers. This one's cliche, but I think the number one thing that surprised me about the Sioux Falls Stroll Club is the impact that it's had on me. So, I did this to build for others. As I said in the beginning, I want to see others be happy and build a space for others to enjoy. But, one of the second or third meetups, I had a dad come up to me and say, like, hey, I'm going through a lot right now. I just got divorced. I don't have any dad friends. I don't have anywhere to go with my kids when I do get them on the weekends. And he's like, this is such a cool event. And this was so great to have, other dads around. So thank you for putting it together. Thank you for organizing it. And like, I'm looking forward to the next one. And so, for me, it was like, oh, wow, like, this is making an impact on someone else. And, for them to share that with me, for someone else to share their experience really made a positive impact on me. And it was like, wow, this is really cool. This is, you're bringing light to someone else's life, which I think was not something that I, originally anticipated, but something that I'm, grateful for, every time we get to meet up with the club.
Yeah. It's definitely a beautiful thing. I mean, again, even the fact that it's teachable and what you've learned from yourself personally from a development standpoint is powerful. Now, you kind of brought up the big A word, accountability. Like this last weekend, I was even having some conversations with my kids about it and trying to instill it. It's a very important trait that I feel like is lacking these days. So, what does like accountability look like when it's maybe like loving and not shaming?
For as a, as a partner or as a father or both?
Both, probably ideally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, like I touched on it a little bit, but I think accountability, starts with admitting that, we don't have it all figured out and that, we're not, even as a parent, like, we don't have all the answers. Certainly not as a spouse. We don't, know all the solutions. So I think, accountability starts with, looking at oneself, and, being willing to admit that you might not know, or you need to be inquisitive, or you need to ask questions. I think and I've been thinking about this a lot, in 2026, the idea, of pointing the finger at someone else and trying to actually flip that around and point the finger at myself. And so I think my accountability personally has been kind of a bit of enlightenment recently, where I'm trying to understand, why do I feel this way? What is going on inside of me that's getting me triggered, that's getting me upset, that's getting me anxious? And so instead of, pointing the finger at someone else and saying like, that situation is making me uncomfortable. Well, what is it about you that makes it uncomfortable? Is it the person that's making you uncomfortable? Is it the action? So I think accountability can start with, instead of saying like, that's making me nervous, or, why are you doing that? Think about your own actions and turn the finger around literally and like point it at yourself and say like, why am I having this reaction? It's okay to feel emotion, but we don't need to always act on that emotion. So, for example, it's okay to be upset about a situation, but it's not okay to have a angry emotional reaction. There's a huge difference in those two actions, or those two concepts. So, feeling an emotion, but not acting on it. So, feeling an emotion, addressing it within ourselves, and having accountability for that. Like, hey, I'm feeling really upset that you just did that, and here's why. Or here's why I'm upset because, my brother broke his leg jumping off the couch. So I'm really nervous when you do that. But we're not going to say that. We're just going to say, like, jump, don't get off the couch, jump down, whatever it is. Just have this like heightened emotional reaction. So, like, accountability starts with probably pointing the finger at oneself and being willing to really be honest with yourself, and like, it's hard. It's not easy. But try to figure out, why are you feeling this way and what does that stem from?
Mm, love that. Yeah, this self-reflection. It's hard for people to look within, but man, once that's like the first step. That's literally what we start with
Yeah.
in the father figure formula is that self-assessment, right? You got to
Oh, you
look
do.
within to
Yeah.
understand your own personal environment before you can go on to things like communication. And we'll talk about a few other things
Yes. Yes.
like time management here is another one I want to lead in, right? So if you were brutally honest with yourself, like if you did a time audit in your week, where's the leak? Like, where do you feel like time could be better spent?
Oh, well, I mean, it's definitely, it's always going to be being, it's always going to be being with the kids. There's always more that we can do. There's always more time that you can spend with the kids. I mean, I think like, I think, I, for me, I'm, whether it's husband dad or stroll club or another activity, I'm putting time into those to build something for myself, to build something for my community, to ultimately build something, for my kids too, that, my dream and my goal is for my kid, my son, to one day take over the stroll club in 20 years and for him to lead it. And with husband dad, I've been fortunate enough to monetize the account with some brand deals. So, I'm providing kind of a secondary income for my family. So, these side hustle, these other activities, are providing a deeper meaning. They are providing financial support or community building, but certainly they take time. They take a lot of time, and they take time, and I'm working a full-time job, so that leaves little time, whether it's, and I'm exercising in the morning. So it's, little time, at night. So it's time away from kids or my spouse to put towards these other avenues. But it's a constant juggling act, right? Trying to figure out a way that you can, because as I said earlier in the call too, like, we want to have those creative outlets. They're important. But I definitely, I think it's fair to say that, again, take the accountability. Like if you're going to build something, if you want to be a great runner and train for a marathon, that's going to be rewarding and awesome. And you should do that, but it's going to take time away from your other, from your family or your career.
Hmm. And I think the time management, in my opinion, kind of comes hand in hand with like setting boundaries, right? And kind of being, as well as with the self assessment. So, like, maybe what's one boundary that really changed your life the most as a husband and a dad?
Yeah, expand on that a little bit. Like a boundary that I set for,
Yeah.
within my,
So, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, like, some people will say, I'm putting my phone down as of 6 p.m. at
Oh,
night,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to be engaging with people who are bring negativity, or right. So it's for some people, it's a very firm level of kind of communication.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe what's one that you can think of that made the biggest impact on your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think a boundary, in for my wife and I think, a boundary was that, I mean, in a general sense that we're going to be very supportive of one another, but that we're going to communicate, every week with a shared calendar and have that mapped out as to what we're doing that week, who's going into the office, what events do we have, what do we have going on, and that boundary of like, if you have something going on, it needs to be in the shared calendar. And like that's the boundary, and that's it. There is no like, because there was a long time in a relationship where like, I would just like, hey, I need help with this husband dad video. Like, can you help me shoot this? And she's like, I had no idea. And I'm like, oh, it just takes 5 minutes. Guys always, oh, it just takes a second, but it's like that's not how it works. The boundary is if I want help shooting a video, I put it in our calendar, a week in advance or 2 days in advance. I let her know, hey, Thursday afternoon, I put it in the calendar, like I need help with this video or whatever it is. So I think, as a partner, that communication, which I've spoken to, that's definitely the boundary, of utilizing that shared calendar. And then I think like, it's cliche, but I think like, for a dad piece of it, my boundary is not tangible. It's more like, my boundary is like nothing less than like the most, present, active, involved dad that I can be, without suffocating my kids. But like if it means, and my wife and I both feel that way, like volunteering in the school, helping out here, being a coach for the sports team. I've talked about like playing with them on the ground. Like that's a non-negotiable for us. And that's probably the boundary of like, that's the bare minimum to be a good parent. Like that's the boundary that you need to be across, to be involved for my wife and I.
Sprinkled with a little bit of dad jokes in there too, right? You
Yes,
gotta throw
yes,
them
yes,
in. Yeah.
and a lot bit of dad
Yeah.
jokes and
Yeah.
humor.
So I got two more questions for you. So, and these are kind of common questions I ask folks that I interview. So we've kind of coined this term like the father mark. It's basically like the legacy or impression that you've left on your kids, and
Yeah,
negative or positive, right? Like some of
yeah,
us, as you mentioned before, maybe had like a negative father mark
yeah.
brought upon us over time from our parents, right? So fast forward 15 years, what do you hope your boys will say about you essentially?
Oh, I mean, I think it's no doubt that, my goal, and I've spoke to it, but it's the answer is that, I want them to feel like, I am their best friend and we have a great relationship deeper than the surface. And, I think a tangible, people kind of say that cliche, but like a tangible answer for me or a tangible example would be like, the star player that hits the game-winning home run, and they interview him after the game and he says, they said, how did you do it? And he said, it's all because of my dad. It's all because of my dad. And he doesn't say like, my coaches or my teammates or my this or my that or all those days in the weight room. It's like, it's all because of my dad and the work that we put in together and all those times playing and enjoying each other's company. So I think like, 15 years from now, like my kid will be 20, my other one will be 17, like whatever they're successful in, it doesn't have to be sports. It can be theater, it can be music, but like if he gets the lead role in the play, you know, in college, I want him to, call me and be excited to tell me and say like, thanks for reading all those scripts with me. Thanks for, practicing, dressing up as the character and doing all those things with me. So like, that's my ultimate goal. Like I don't, that's success for me. That's the definition of like a successful dad and a successful son, or daughter, but that like, they really feel like, they're successful, not because you forced them to be or you steered them in this direction, but that you are like, undeniably, unprecedented, unconditionally there, in a genuine, real way, and never back down and always, gave them what they need to succeed.
Love that. And you also kind of brought up empathy earlier. I really feel like at the forefront of most relationships, I try to lead with empathy, right? And I think that goes a long way, especially when people see that you kind of naturally care. So, last question here: what would you say to a father who feels like he is quietly failing?
Yeah, I would say don't give up. Understand that, every single dad is in the trenches. Whether your kid is 2 months old or 20 years old, like nobody has it figured out. And, everything that I've talked about today, I believe, but I don't have it all in practice yet. I don't have the perfect playbook. Nobody does. So, to a dad that's failing, I would say, keep going, keep trying. Don't give up, don't get frustrated. Approach every day with a smile, with gratitude, with empathy. Be willing to admit that, maybe some of the issues are because of you. Because of what you're doing or not doing, but failing is not a death sentence. Is Failing is not failure. Failing is a stage that we are all at. And it just means that you get another opportunity tomorrow or the next day, to stack a win, to stack another W, and to keep going. So if you're failing now, remember that it's a stage and that, tomorrow, the next day, the next week, could and will be better with your mindset and with your actions.
I used to take losses and failures really, really hard, but when I found out it was like a learning experience, almost like an A/B test or like a split test, that you could be
Yeah,
like, let's try it this way or try that way and see which was kind of a better route. That was like a game changer for me. So
it's
I'm
you.
totally, yeah. So again, Elliot, man, you have something to follow up on that?
No, no, no. I was just gonna say it's huge. I mean, it's again, it's yeah, it's just like it's hard. I think as men, it goes back to like wanting to have it figured out and like, not, like I need to fix it. I need to have the solution. I can't fail. Like I gotta and it's like, we're not like, that's not humanly possible. And, yeah, being willing to have a different perspective is important, and it pays dividends. It can be really helpful as a parent, as a spouse.
Mhm. Well, Elliot, man, I really appreciate you and your answers and your time and your enthusiasm here. Let's take a minute or so to, I know you mentioned a few of the projects you're working on, but let's take a minute here to do a little
Yeah.
plug for yourself and where we can find you.
Oh no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, again, really appreciate having me on. Definitely, making fun, creative dad content at The Husband Dad on all platforms. We're doing Sioux Falls Stroll Club, so I don't know if you have any listen. We only have 500,000 people in the state, so I don't know if you're got any listeners in the Midwest or South Dakota, but at Sioux Falls Stroll Club, it's a dad community, the first in the state, where we do once a month dad meetups, pop-up events or walks around our community. And then I'm also part of the Common Dad team. So Common Dad is a lifestyle dad brand out of Boston. They built one one of the first dad diaper bags. They also have, premium products for dads such as hats, hoodies, stuff like that. So at Common Dad is another another dad, another parenting piece that I'm working on. So but yeah, I mean, you can always, I would say the number one thing, you can find me on the algorithm. I'll probably pop up.
Definitely, definitely, man. Well, again, I appreciate you and your time. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope we can keep in touch and keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and back to you too. Like, I want to give you a shout out. The father figure formula is awesome. I think, what you're building, with discussion, meaningful connections, it's very intentional, it's very real. And I think, like, when I saw that you popped up, I was like, oh man, this is awesome because, it's easy to, not to dive back into it, but it's easy to mask issues with comedy, right? Like it's easy to like have this struggle and this thing with my wife, and I'm like, I'm gonna go make a funny video about it, and like, and it's great, it's a lot harder to have that conversation with your wife and to say like, hey, this thing really upset me, or I'm feeling hurt, this is triggering a part of my family of origin or whatever. So, for you to be vulnerable as a parent, as a dad, I think you're leading the way in that. You're one of the first that I've seen, that's really being open and intentional about those discussions. So kudos to you for building and growing. And I know it's still growing and still developing, but I love what you're doing. And I truly believe that like our paths are going to cross again. And this dad world is like in the infancy stages, right?
Yeah.
And 10 years from now, whether it's, father figure formula, common dad, or any of these things, like we're going to see growth in the industry, across the board, across the world. And I look forward to seeing how we can collaborate again, man. So love what you're doing. And shout out to you as well for being a creative and building something awesome.
Appreciate you, man. And that's so interesting because like laughter for me has always been there. It's always been a tool. And even in sometimes in the coaching elements, I often have that vulnerability in making fun of myself, which then opens
It,
up a further
it
conversation.
does.
So
It
laughter
does.
is a gateway, I think, to a form of communication.